brilliant pieces of modern animation and its relationship to classic Gothic storytelling.
As we both travel into the unknown.
Before I can really go in depth with this series, I will need to define some things that go into the makings of a Gothic story. Generally, in order to be considered a piece of Gothic fiction, a story must include the following. First, it must have its characters going on a journey that is both internal and external. Second, a melodramatic and morally ambiguous story, usually evoking a previous time period relative to when the narrative was created, all the while constantly evoking dark or supernatural elements. And finally, it must occur within a sublime setting that is often personified. We will go into each one of these elements in more detail later, but for now, I would like to go into this narrative element first. Over the Garden Wall is the story about two brothers, Wirt and Greg, who are trying to find their way home from the unknown, a strange forest where long-forgotten stories are revealed to those who travel through the wood. While the brothers' journey remains the most important part of the series, a large amount of focus is placed on the smaller short stories which present themselves on their journey. When Patrick McHale was originally pitching the series to Cartoon Network, he wanted these stories to have a fairy tale-like quality to them, almost as if Wirt and Greg were witnessing stories that were lost to the ages. I had the pleasure of being able to interview Nick Cross, the art director of short programs at Cartoon Network and the head art director for Over the Garden Wall. And when discussing the fairy tale-like nature of this show, he had this to say. Over the Garden Wall was very much meant to be a modern fairy tale. The art style is meant to seem like something from another time, and the fact that the characters are lost children in the woods, witches, ghosts, wolves, and woodsmen is on purpose. I think those types of stories really resonate with people, especially if you want to make it a slightly scary story for kids. This classification as a modern fairy tale is very important when considering the show's relationship with classic Gothic fiction, because many original fairy tales from the likes of the brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen share the same elements of Gothic fiction, to the point where many say that they are one and the same. In an academic paper, The Motifs and Moral Ambiguity in Over the Garden Wall, writer Christiana Wilsey writes how Over the Garden Wall's status as a modern fairy tale allows it to reside in the dark ambiguity of Gothic storytelling, while at the same time allowing it to remain appropriate for children. Like Gothic fiction, traditional fairy tales have morally ambiguous narratives, with often dark and disturbing elements, all for the purposes of teaching some sort of lesson to the younger generations. While modern interpretations from the likes of Disney and Shrek have abandoned this ambiguity for the sake of marketability, Over the Garden Wall revels in this ambiguous dark nature that fairy tales were previously known for. As an example, take the 7th chapter of this series, The Ringing of the Bell. It is here where Wirt and Greg come across Lorna, a young woman who lives under the supernatural control of her monstrous caretaker, Auntie Whispers. Wirt, falling in love with Lorna, decides to help her escape her aunt, only to find that Lorna was possessed by an evil spirit who devours all who try to help her. And to make sure that the twist would not be lost on younger audiences, Greg immediately spells it out.
Oh, for some reason I thought that old lady was the people eater, but it was Lorna all along. It just goes to show you stuff.
In the end, Wirt and Greg are able to banish the evil spirit and save Lorna, and she decides to stay with Auntie Whispers, who only wish to protect her. This episode captures all of the Gothic elements that come with being a modern fairy tale. It uses the iconography of stories like Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, and Snow White. In such stories, it is often the job of the hero to rescue fair maidens like Lorna from their monstrous caretakers. Though, as it turns out, there are no monsters, and neither Lorna nor Auntie Whispers can be considered truly evil. Likewise, despite their good intentions, Wirt and Greg do very little to be considered heroes in this story, leaving us, the audience, with very little distinction between who is a hero or villain. And that is the core identity of Gothic storytelling. As a general rule, Gothic stories often reside in the realms of moral ambiguity, where the characters are often not easily placed within categories of good or evil. It might begin with characters inhabiting archetypes in order to create a classical set of expectations where heroes and villains are obvious, but more often than not, this will be put into question as time goes on, as we begin to see the noticeable flaws within our heroes and learn to empathize with our villains, which has ironically become a new set of expectations for those who are familiar with the genre. And while this is sort of the case with Over the Garden Wall, it is often revealed that many of the monsters and evils that Wirt and Greg encounter are in actuality benevolent, if not actually good. Creatures like the wolf monster, the citizens of Plattsfield, the gorilla, Quincy Endicott, Auntie Whispers, and the woodsman are all set up to be classical Gothic villains. The monster in the woods, the hive-minded mob, the savaged, untamed beast, the murderous conman, the cannibalistic witch, and the man in exile from society, each one appearing to be menacing to anyone at a first glance. Though upon further inspection, these apparently villainous characters will only be outwardly evil-looking, revealing them to have more complexity behind them than one might be led to believe.
Creating a morally ambiguous narrative often relies upon subversion, creating a certain set of expectations and viewpoints for your audiences, turning them on their heads, and causing your audiences to question those very same expectations and viewpoints. And Over the Garden Wall doesn't just cause you to question its story or characters, it also causes you to question the limits of what a cartoon can do. And in order to really understand that, we're going to have to look at the influences behind this series.
Quite often, Gothic stories will take place in a time before the work was created. This is often used to impart an effect of foreignness to the work, in order to make it more digestible to the audience. While there is no discernible time period in Over the Garden Wall, the realm presents itself as a place lost in time. Elijah Wood, the voice actor for Wirt, once stated, "If the show were played on a record, it would be done on an old phonograph," meaning that much of the show's art direction was inspired by artwork and inventions from the early 19th and 20th century. These inspirations include paintings by Gustav Doré and Ivan Shishkin, illustrations by Edward Lear, Harrison Cady, and Childe Harold. Just as a note, this is not to be confused with the character from Lord Byron's Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, though there are apt comparisons to be made between this and the show that I will get to later. It should also be noted that many of these inspirations were famous for their works with classic fairy tales. Gustav Doré was famous for these illustrations of Little Red Riding Hood and Bluebeard. Edward Lear wrote the story The Owl and the Pussycat, and Harrison Cady was illustrating fairy tales very similar to Over the Garden Wall. Though just as these artists were known for their depictions of fairy tales, they were also known for their depictions of nature. Many of these artists, particularly Doré, were part of the Romantic art movement. This movement placed a large focus on nature as a reaction to the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, where nature would often be depicted with an air of mystery and grandeur. Romanticism is very important to the Gothic, as the two were beginning to come into prominence at about the same time, with many debating which movement was more influenced by the other. And when you look at these backgrounds, it's easy to see the Romantic influences that were going into this show. Often, the backgrounds are made to resemble a style of painting called grisaille, which was very common throughout the Romantic art movement, where they utilize a gradient of one color. Though, unlike most grisaille paintings which commonly used grays and blacks for their color schemes, the show's backgrounds instead opt to utilize oranges and greens, emphasizing the colors of fall. Another piece of artistic inspiration from this era comes from chromolithographs. Chromolithographs were mass-produced multicolor prints that began to emerge in the early 19th century as a cheaper means of producing art as opposed to painting. This can also be seen in the backgrounds of the show, where there is this muted quality to the colors throughout the series, similar to the fragile nature of chromolithographs. Good art direction in any visual medium will often help to reinforce the narrative that it sets forth. Utilizing and combining the styles of romantic paintings and chromolithographs creates an interesting internal conflict within the art style. While both came into prominence at about the same time, the two are fundamentally at odds with one another, with Romanticism acting as a rejection for the artificiality of industry which chromolithographs were a product of. This internal conflict within the art style helps to make the world of Over the Garden Wall seem more dark and mysterious, supporting the Gothic narrative while giving it a unique visual identity. Though if there's one aspect of Over the Garden Wall that helps to reinforce the Gothic's use of the past, it is seen in the ways the show pays tribute to the early days of animation. This can be seen in the designs for certain characters, some small references, and even scenes that directly replicate some early cartoons, from the works of Ub Iwerks, the Fleischer Brothers, and Van Buren Studios. The 8th chapter, Babes in the Woods, particularly demonstrates this process, where many sequences directly mirror the early Walt Disney cartoon Alice's Adventures, where many sequences are being similar, if not exactly replicating the original. Another studio that seems to have a clear influence on the show was Fleischer Studios, who were known for Betty Boop and some of the early Popeye cartoons. Though while the Tavern Keeper is comparable to Betty Boop in both voice and appearance, the main influence from Fleischer Studios comes from their use of rotoscope, an invention of Fleischer Studios. Rotoscoping comes from filming something and then proceeding to draw and animate based on the film footage. This technique is used throughout most of animation and film, though when the Fleischer brothers utilized it, it is often used to create a strange and surreal sequence. While it can be argued that the surreal imagery for the Fleischers can be seen throughout the entire series, the musical number for the song The Highwayman specifically emulates the rotoscoping techniques for the Fleischer brothers. In my interview with Nick Cross, he told me, "I had this memory that I kept pushing for a weird Fleischer brothers style dance number in the show. This sort of animation is difficult to get an overseas studio to do, since it would be a lot of work. So I basically volunteered myself to do it. It was a fun challenge, and it sort of lends a weird mood to the scene.
I'll knock you out, drag you off the road, steal your shoes from off your feet, and then highwayman, when I'm making me."
So you have a series that is paying tribute to earlier forms of animation, in a time where quality animation is more expensive to produce, causing the medium to feel more restrictive in its material. Nick Cross once told me, "I grew up in a time before cable TV. Most of the cartoons I watched as a kid were old cartoons from Disney, Warner Brothers, and Hanna-Barbera, as well as public domain cartoons. Since many of these were theatrical shorts, and not necessarily meant strictly for kids, the quality was high, as well as very innovative. There were no rules back then, and they were still figuring things out. So there is a wild sense of experimentation. It makes a lot of sense that a Gothic series like Over the Garden Wall would harken back to a more experimental period of animation, considering how often Gothic literature takes advantage of the past. During the rising prominence of Gothic literature, another artistic movement that was influential on the genre was the growing movement of neoclassicism, which, to briefly summarize, sought to emulate the artistic traditions of past movements, cultures, and civilizations. As a movement, neoclassicism has drawn some rightful criticisms for the ways that it can glorify certain eras of history while ignoring the problems of those eras, as well as the ways that it has been used to cater to reactionary ideologies. Though quite often, The most celebrated and long-lasting examples of neoclassicism do so by using this format to comment upon the era of its setting, as well as the era of its publication. For example, the first Gothic novel is widely agreed to be Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, which was written in 1764. The story presents itself to audiences as a lost manuscript of real events that were written 200 years ago. This set the novel in a time period of Shakespeare's plays and presented it in the same context of Dante's Inferno, highly respected pieces of work both then and now. This use of neoclassicism gave Walpole more freedom when writing this story, since he wouldn't have to be worried about meeting modern literary standards, which resulted in the work gaining legitimacy in a time where novels were considered improper and a low form of writing. Similarly, because Over the Garden Wall combines aspects of early and modern animation, it adds some legitimacy to the show to perhaps older potential audiences. But more vitally, its use of neoclassicism helps to comment upon the cartoons this series takes influence from. For as influential and experimental the early days of animation were, it is foolish to deny that this era suffers from too many oversimplified stories, as well as being beholden to regressive ideologies. So while you are well within your rights to enjoy this era of animation, it's impossible to deny how this subversion of these classical cartoons greatly helps the narrative. Because Over the Garden Wall caters to viewers who might have an appreciation for these older cartoons, it was able to be more accessible for older audiences than other children's shows of today. And because older cartoons had a reputation of being darker than modern cartoons, borrowing the aesthetics of these older cartoons and putting them in a modern context helps to create some of the Gothic elements that we see throughout the series. Though, in order to examine these modern contexts, we will need to examine our main characters. Characters in Gothic literature are usually portrayed within very well-defined archetypes. These archetypes do not only reinforce the narrative, but also the characteristics of the genre. Consider the protagonist, Wirt, and how he takes on a lot of inspiration from two areas deeply rooted in the Gothic tradition. To start off, Wirt embodies many traits of the Byronic hero. The Byronic hero is an archetype based off of the Romantic poet Lord George Gordon Byron, a writer who is remembered as an extravagant, melodramatic, and self-destructive man who was highly influential on both the Romantic and Gothic movement in literature. Based on both his real-world personality and some hyperbolic accounts of him, the Byronic hero is seen as an embodiment of the values upheld within the Romantic movement. Many famous characters in Gothic literature emulate the characteristics of Lord Byron, from Victor Frankenstein, Lorenzo de Medina, the Phantom of the Opera, to even Edward Cullen. These characters are seen as passionate, mysterious, and dangerous. And you can change him. Wirt is very similar to this in many regards. Like the archetypal Byronic hero, he is cultured in the arts, emotionally conflicted, and even charismatic and mysterious enough to have a fair share of ladies gaining affection for him. Alongside this, Wirt is smart enough to be able to identify architecture.
It's like French Rococo style. That doesn't really seem in line with Endicott's Georgian sensibilities.
How? What? Who on earth am I talking to right now?
Should I not know that sort of stuff?
Being incredibly introspective and somewhat self-deprecating.
I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm just like a boat upon a winding river, twisting towards an endless black sea. Further and further, drifting away from where I want to be, who I want to be.
And even enough of an artist to create a 15-track tape of poetry and clarinet for his crush, including the music playing in the background right now. It is because of these traits that many find themselves attracted to these sort of characters. One needn't look further than the fan art of him to see that this is definitely the case for Wirt. Though, like many other things within Gothic literature, the Byronic hero has a lot of darker elements beyond their romantic exterior. While they may be intelligent and mysterious, they can also be arrogant and selfish. And while Wirt is a lot less threatening compared to other Byronic heroes, this darker side is still present through Wirt's complicity. Throughout their journey, Wirt is often resigned to whatever fate he finds himself to, while rarely trying to do anything about it.
Greg,
Yes, Wirt?
can we please stop pretending we're gonna get home?
Huh?
Can we admit we're lost for good? That this fog is deeper than we can ever understand. And we are but wayward leaves, scattered to the air by an indifferent wind. Can we just admit we're never gonna get back home, Greg? Can we do that?
Wirt, for a majority of the series, is a bit of a jerk. He is dismissive of Greg, is often of little help, and refuses to take responsibility for his actions. Much of this is in fact a product of his Byronic traits. Because of his intelligence and introspective nature, he is also incredibly self-conscious and is often resigned to the idea that all is hopeless and the best thing to do is nothing, despite how many people come to rely on him. Contrast this with Greg, the younger of the two, and the main source of comic relief within the show. Throughout the two's journey, Greg is often contrasting Wirt's pessimism with the happy-go-lucky innocence, where Greg is often optimistic that whatever situation he is in will turn out okay, even in situations where he by all rights should be absolutely terrified.
You have beautiful eyes.
Though despite this almost ignorant optimism, Greg is a lot smarter and responsible than Wirt and the audience might give him credit for. Greg is able to defeat the wolf, save the school from bankruptcy, help Quincy Endicott, and is ultimately able to outsmart the beast, all thanks in part to his upbeat attitude. With this in mind, Greg has been often characterized, most notably by PBS Idea Channel, as an example of the Kierkegaardian Knight of Faith. This concept is based on the writings of Soren Kierkegaard, a notable philosopher during the same time period where Gothic storytelling was coming into prominence. According to his writing, the Knight of Faith is a character who often has complete faith in all around him, leading him to be a more free and happy individual as a result. Some other examples of this archetype can be seen from the likes of Abraham, the Norse pantheon, and even Charlie Brown, all characters of action that are willing to commit to whatever they do because they have that faith, despite all of the inherent risks. It is interesting to consider this alongside the fact that of all the characters in this series, Greg is the only character that does not receive any substantial development as a character. I suppose you could chalk it up to him being so young or him being a one-dimensional piece of comic relief, but ultimately, I think the reason why Greg is the way he is because he is represented by everything that Wirt isn't, as well as all of the things that he could be if he was willing to open up. It shows that despite the utter hopelessness of their situation, Greg is able to succeed because he is not willing to lose hope in the face of this, allowing him to be a braver, happier, and more caring person than his older brother. And Wirt is only able to progress when he stops seeing his brother as a merely ignorant child. Ultimately, the reason why the two are lost in the unknown in the first place is because Wirt refuses to take responsibility for his actions. Because of Wirt's constantly resigned attitude, he's often left in a constant state of complacency and hopelessness. And this ultimately acts as an internal boundary between Wirt and, quote, where he wants to be and who he wants to be.
It is here where Wirt differentiates himself from most depictions of the Byronic hero, where most either succumb to their fatal flaws or succeed without any consequences. Wirt is able to save himself from this fate, due in part to his second biggest influence as a character, Dante, from the Divine Comedy.
Despite being written a clear 400 years before the Castle of Otranto, it is easy to see how much of a progenitor the Divine Comedy was to Gothic literature. Like modern examples of Gothic literature, the Divine Comedy is also a melodramatic narrative, with constant dark and disturbing imagery and a setting so foreboding it is literally hell. It asks big questions on our views of morality and death, very much in the same ways that Gothic stories would end up doing. It should also be noted that Gustave Doré, one of the primary influences on the show's aesthetics, is also famous for illustrating many scenes from Dante. Like Wirt, and many other emotionally conflicted heroes within Gothic literature, Dante is also intelligent yet arrogant, contemplative yet resigned, and independent yet selfish. Dante also begins this long, contemplative, introspective journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven after being lost in the woods and finding himself in a strange, unknown realm. Wirt is even called the Pilgrim by many throughout the series, a position that is often associated with Dante. And like Wirt, Dante also begins the story by mourning the loss of his love.
No, though I am lost, my wounded heart resides back home, in pieces strewn about the graveyard of my lost love.
The comparisons between the two continue on, which we will come back to, though the most important comparison between the two is that, like Wirt, Dante is able to improve himself. Dante is also a very flawed individual, similar to Wirt at the beginning, and it is only when he is able to acknowledge and defeat the evil within him that he is able to ascend to heaven and be one with God.
And that's why I think Over the Garden Wall is one of the more sophisticated Gothic narratives to come out in recent years. It's willing to call out Wirt for all of his flaws, and by extension, calling out the flaws of standard Byronic heroes.
Throughout the rest of Gothic fiction, it feels as though there's this need to almost romanticize these flawed protagonists, especially if they are a man. Quite often, any flaws will be either met with a swift karmic resolution for their evil actions, or some quick revelation that justifies all of their previous actions, no matter how imperfect they might be. This leaves little in ways of establishing a middle ground in terms of a character's morality, often casting things into binary distinctions, which is ironic since Gothic literature is often meant to question these very same binary distinctions between good and evil. Though because there is an extreme lack of evil villains or even anti-heroes throughout Over the Garden Wall, the only thing that is keeping Wirt from getting him and Greg home is Wirt's inability to acknowledge his faults and learn how to overcome them.
Learning to accept your flaws is a pretty sophisticated narrative to put forward, especially if your target demographic is children. Though, wait, you might say, if there aren't any villains or anti-heroes in this story, then what do you call the beast? Well, since you asked.
If there's one thing that can be said about the unknown, it is how well it encapsulates a concept called the sublime, a common principle in the Gothic and Romanticism that focuses on the grandeur of nature, where nature is often portrayed as something beyond our comprehension, as if it were something above humanity. Looking at these images of the unknown, there is always this element of greatness and mystery surrounding it. For while the sublime is often a sight to behold, there is always an element of untamed danger behind it. As a result, these sublime locations throughout Gothic literature are often that way because they serve as an example of man's insignificance when compared to nature. It's why images of decaying homes, abandoned castles, and deep dark forests are such staples of modern Gothic stories. They help to reinforce how little control the characters have over their situations, reflecting how little control we can have over the world. This focus on the setting, combined with the language of the writer, often leads it to becoming personified in some manner, sometimes becoming a character unto themselves. That being said, the unknown is a strange setting, to say the least. There's no discernible time period, because each new episode has architecture from different eras. Nick Cross even once specifically cited how someone pointed out very early on that doorknobs were a relatively new thing in the 1700s, since they didn't exist, so they had to research what those looked like. If you watch the show, you'll see all the doors have different handles and latches that are all historically correct. The same goes for the fashion, as often the characters' clothing will often date them to wildly different periods of fashion from different areas of the world. Because of the multiple parallels to different locations and time periods, the unknown feels like it is a place not of this world, and that's because it isn't. Like one of Wirt's inspirations, Dante, the two brothers are in fact journeying through some form of the afterlife, with the unknown serving as some form of limbo that only those on the cusp of death may see. Indeed, in the 9th chapter of the series, it is revealed that Wirt and Greg are in fact from the modern era, roughly around the late 80s and early 90s, who are both transported into the unknown while they nearly drown in a river. This is reinforced constantly throughout the series, by the pumpkins of Plattsfield, which sounds similar to Pottersfield.
Say, aren't you a little too early?
What do you mean?
I mean, it doesn't seem like you're ready to join us just yet.
And what about you? You sure you want to leave?
Me? Yes.
Oh, well, you'll join us someday.
By the grave of Quincy Endicott being seen in the background, and even an old Woody Guthrie song about death that plays in the background as the boys fall into the river while dodging a train. As a result, it can be assumed that these long-forgotten stories that were previously alluded to in the introductions are stories about souls that were lost to time. Though it seems here that all of these souls are more or less content with their fates, though the only bad thing which seems to befall those in the unknown is when anyone is found by the beast.
So let's talk about the beast.
Despite the fact that many aspects of this series have been more or less agreed to in their meaning, the beast is one of the most ambiguous elements of the show. There's very little known about his origins. He is rarely seen throughout the series, and the most we really get to see of the beast is from a few frames in the very last episode. From what can be gathered, the beast has no distinct inspiration or influence. Some point out similarities seen between the beast and other figures from literature and folklore, some including traditional portrayals of Lucifer, a ghost from Old English folk tales called Herne the Hunter, the Aelith as seen in Lovecraftian stories, and even the Cernunnos of Norse mythologies, all horned beings that are associated with death. Whatever the inspiration, the beast is a horned being whose soul is kept alive in a lantern which is fueled by the oils of the Edelwood trees, trees seen all around the unknown, which later revealed to be made from the lost souls of the unknown. While some say that the beast is an incarnation of death or the devil himself, my interpretation is a little more abstract. I believe that the beast is a personification of the unknown, in the same ways that other Gothic stories personify their settings. Let me explain. In many respects, the souls of the unknown are very much lost like Wirt and Greg, each one trying to find a way to complete their own stories and try to get a happy end. It is only when they begin to lose the will to go on that the beast steals their souls. As such, the unknown as a place is also a place of hopelessness, with many locations depicting the unknown as a place of isolation and darkness. I believe that out of this hopelessness, the beast was formed, and uses the souls of those subdued by the hopelessness of the unknown in order to strengthen that very same hopelessness. That's why all the residents of the unknown are all strangely enthusiastic all the time. It's a defense mechanism against the hopelessness of the unknown that's required to survive. This idea of the unknown doesn't seem to only apply to the magical woods. It also applies to the problems each character has. Wirt is unable to face the unknown factors of himself, Beatrice being unable to face the unknown of her family, and the woodsman unwilling to accept the unknown of losing his daughter. Each one of these characters is unwilling to face their problems because they are afraid of the incomprehensible. Humans inherently fear what we don't understand, It is one of the most basic survival instincts, though more often than not, things become a lot less scary the more we learn about it. Learning how to face what we don't understand is how we become better people.
Woodsman?
When I first got lost, you told me to beware the unknown. But you were wrong. This place isn't scary. What's really scary is going home and facing your problems. That's the real unknown.
Gothic literature often invites audiences to reflect on that which we fear. Whether it be the evil nature within ourselves, our unknown place in the universe, or of our own mortality. While other Gothic stories will end with their characters succumbing to those fears, Over the Garden Wall has its characters triumphing by giving them hope. Be it hope within themselves, hope within others, or even hope that everything will be alright. Wirt is able to save himself by learning to acknowledge his fears. It is once he loses his feelings of hopelessness, he is able to climb out of that river.
In an age where our media likes to portray its stories in the most dour and dark ways possible, Over the Garden Wall shows us the benefit of rejecting this darkness surrounding us and learning to face the unknown. Thank you for watching. Best wishes.
It needs to be about 20% cooler. It needs to be about 20% cooler.
She found it in the same spot she found Luke's lightsaber.
Oh,
from
yeah, but that's a story for another time that we never got to.
Nope. Well, yeah. Miles Kanata had Luke Skywalker's lightsaber.
The janitor found it. It's fine.
It's a story for another time. It was in her mystery box.
Oh man, how was that as a fuck you to Ryan Johnson when Luke Skywalker shows up in this? And Rey tries to throw her lightsaber away and he catches it. He's like, this is the most fucking important thing ever. And he looked right at the camera and flipped off Ryan Johnson.
You guys. Wow.
Watching the whole thing together, I freaked out. I'm like, this doesn't track. You can't follow what's happening. You can't follow what the big stakes are. I got really scared.
Well, Luke had a change of heart since he died, right? He became one with the Force, and now he's a little more chill. He's less like bitter and cynical as he was in Jedi. You always said, Last Jedi, the Luke Skywalker storyline, that he's, you know.
It's the most interesting idea that movie has.
And everybody hates it. They ruined Luke Skywalker.
I still think you could have made a good arc out of it. You still could have gotten to a point where he's accepted the Force again. But it's a character arc, and you get to that point in like the third movie.
Yeah, just the fact that he acknowledges something that was unintentionally made clear in the prequels, which is that the Jedi are kind of awful. Like the fact that he mentions that in The Last Jedi is like, okay, that's interesting. But now it doesn't matter. Here, Rey, have your lightsaber again.
They just left him in a really poor position.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of little slights at Ryan Johnson in this. The Snoke in a tank for sure was one. The lightsaber bit.
Well, Ryan Johnson didn't create Snoke though. He just killed him.
Right.
That's because nothing matters. That was the driving force of that movie.
Yeah.
Rey's parents are nobody. Snoke doesn't matter. All these things that were set up in the last movie don't matter. So yeah, then what do you do after that?
He was trying so hard.
You scramble and you make a movie that feels rushed because you're trying to introduce a bunch of shit.
Yeah.
And have it pay off.
It's overcompensating too. Because all you got to do is, if that's your plan, is to like, okay, let's fix all these things that everybody hated about The Last Jedi. You could do that without shoving 15 other story ideas into it.
Well, yeah. The idea that Rey is Palpatine's granddaughter, right? The whole time she thought, I don't know, maybe they should have thrown some clues like, no, maybe you're a part of a Skywalker family, you know?
Well, if somebody smart were in charge from the beginning and planned this out, maybe you could have done that.
No, I'm saying from Last Jedi.
Okay.
You're starting with this movie, right?
Yeah.
You could do that. You could play with that Rey backstory a little, mold it, change it a little differently. But what Jay is saying, and is what I agree with, is the entire cast, other than Rey, Palpatine, Kylo Ren, and maybe Leia to a certain extent, are all completely useless. Finn and Poe and Rose and C-3PO and Chewbacca, Lando, everyone's useless. They're given the bulk of the story, which is to to track down some guy who was sent to kill Rey's parents because he might have the Wayfinder, which could lead. That's what Luke was searching for to get to the thing.
We got to go get a thing that'll tell us how to find a thing that'll take us to another thing.
And Palpatine didn't need 10,000 starships to blow up every planet, and like all that shit was in there. So then they could have a space battle. You had 2.5 hours to flesh out this convoluted, because there's that little scene where Rey and Kylo were talking, and he's like, "What I did before about your parents."
Oh yeah, the scene where they're kind of forced talking again.
And she sees the Vader helmet and stuff like that. That was good.
Yeah.
You know, like, but
the whole Star Destroyer confrontation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have a handful of scenes like that, and one or two little action scenes that are remember when they went to the Burning Man festival? I mean, what was that?
That was where they had to go to get the thing that would tell them where the other thing was.
Yeah, and there were so many, like, we got to get the thing to get the thing to get the thing. And it's like, and all of that just confused the whole storyline and the whole emotional stuff. Kylo killing Han Solo, his relationship with Leia, he's still wavering between if he's good or bad. Yeah. Rey is also kind of not sure who she is, whether or not she's failing at her Jedi training. Remember, she couldn't hit the ball, and then she had to hit the ball with her spear. I always thought the end of that spear looked like a lightsaber. Turns out it was.
That's great.
You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, is that where she pulled her lightsaber out of it? Yeah. I didn't notice that.
I've always thought
I didn't notice
that
that.
like a lightsaber on the tip of that spear. It really does.
Huh.
The whole ending of this movie, like, I had no sense of where anyone was. Everyone's just flying, and there's 5,000 Star Destroyers. And then we cut to Palpatine,
and they gotta
and it's
blow
just
up
flashing
just
light.
the one for some reason.
Yeah. That's the other thing, too, and that's another, like, just 80-yard line. They blow up that one, and then there's, like, some line of dialogue about how, like, everyone in the entire galaxy is now destroying all the other Star Destroyers.
For some reason, and I don't understand this at all, none of the Star Destroyers could leave the Sith planet.
Right. Here's why.
Unless they had the navigational beacon from the other Star Destroyer.
Yeah.
They can't just point at their ship at a star and just go that way. They're just stuck there. I don't know why.
They were all interlinked because it was hard. Poe had a line about it.
Of course he did. One line, right?
And it was, they can't all leave the planet because the navigation's too hard.
You just turn your back to the planet and start going in a direction.
Although all their ships came to the planet and left at the end without any problem. Didn't they?
Yeah.
Who are we talking about now?
All the giant fleet of all the ships from all over the universe all came at the end, but they all fought in the battle on the planet, but then they also just left at the end. So they didn't need a navigational beacon. But remember, they were going to blow up that navigational beacon, and then the bad guy, General Pride, was onto them, and so they switched it to the main ship.
Yeah.
And then they just shot a gun at the main ship and blew it up.
Once they know they're going to get blown up, can't they just switch it to a different ship? Can't they switch it to like 8 different ships? Oh, switch it to each individual ship. There you go.
We haven't gotten all the navigational beacons in stock yet. They're on order.
He hasn't willed them into existence yet.
Yeah, he's still working on that. Why did you wait? Why didn't you do that first, Palpatine? It takes him like a year of dedicated concentration with Sith magic to will a Star Destroyer into existence.
Oh, Palpy? Can we just talk about Palpatine? The part that made me laugh the hardest was when he just shot his Force lightning up into space, and it flew everywhere. It's such a shame, too, because there's like a couple moments early on in this movie where the two of them are interacting, and it's like, these guys are great together. And then, like, Adam Driver's great, like, Richard E. Grant, who was General Pride or whatever Pride, he's a great actor. And it's all just in service of nothing.
We don't know much about General Pride.
No, just mean and evil incarnate. Never smile once.
Like all these good actors.
That's why they go off and do movies like Marriage Story.
That's true. In between doing big Disney films.
Adam Driver, Star Wars pays for his mansion, Marriage Story pays for his coffee.
Did anyone notice, because I've generally liked Daisy Ridley in these movies, but in this one, she seems checked out. There's a part when she's on the ruins of the Death Star.
She's been getting hate for, how long has it been now?
That's true. It could be
6
some
years?
of that.
Yeah.
Her character's a Mary Sue, so I hate her as a human being. But there's a part when she's on the ruins of the Death Star, and there's that moment where she's fighting the dark version of herself, and the dark version has the double-sided lightsaber or whatever. She looks like she's laughing. She looks like she's holding back laughing when she pulls out that red lightsaber. It's like she doesn't care anymore, does she?
I think they said, have a devilish grin.
That didn't come across at all.
Yeah, it came off as her thinking this whole thing was a farce. Man, it's true. But no, yeah, she, I think in the very first movie, she's a relatively unknown actress in the first movie, so she was giving it her darndest.
Yeah.
But, yeah, you're probably right.
She's done. She's over this shit. Well, that was something, too, that came out recently, right? Like, in interviews, where all these main actors were saying like they're done with Star Wars after this. Finn was like, I don't want to be Disney Plus or something like that.
What would it take to get you to come back to do Finn again?
In what?
I mean, I don't know if Finn is...
You ain't gonna Disney Plus me. I ain't getting no Disney Plus.
How did Ray know where that little farmhouse was?
She's just there. She found it on Google Maps. It's in Tunisia.
Don't think about it. It's emotional. It's emotional, Jay.
The Force. The Force.
The Force.
Oh, the Force.
Force emotions, Force emotions.
Remember, Leia and Luke's ghosts were hanging out there, so they guided her.
Oh, okay, that's fair. And why was that random old lady just in the middle of fucking nowhere?
So that she could say the line, "I'm Rey Skywalker."
I'm just a Skywalker now. I've just decided it.
They made her old because she's wandering around the desert. That's her path to go shopping and come back to her house. She goes past the old Skywalker, or Lars homestead, many times.
I'm shocked that wasn't a callback to somebody.
There's very few characters it could be.
What's Watto? Super elderly Watto.
It could have been that super old lady who said, "My bones are aching, Annie. There's a storm coming." Do you remember her?
No.
You don't?
I don't remember.
My bones are aching? Is that what she says?
She warns them of the dust storm that's coming.
Okay.
Oh, my bones are aching. Storm's coming up, Annie. You better get home quick.
So Rey's a Skywalker because she just decided to be.
Well,
I know thematically what they're doing, but it's just like
she chose the lightness over the dark.
Yeah, the Skywalkers are all
It
that
was very.
exists.
It got very Jedi at the end. Join me.
Oh, where it's like anticlimactic and not very good. Yeah.
No, Return of the Jedi.
They just blatantly redid the throne room scene from Return of the Jedi.
Because he opens up the ceiling so that she could see the space battle.
Yeah.
Your friends are
Yeah.
going to die, and
Just with lots more strobe lights.
Yes, and join me. Whatever. That was the more interesting stuff in the movie. Everything every other character did was boring. Remember the magic space dagger?
Oh God, that disappeared.
Oh yeah. No, well that guided them to the wreckage of the Death Star, and then I guess it's not important after that, right?
No, remember, she held the dagger up and the little thing came out?
Yeah.
And she held it up?
And it made the shape of it. It was like the Goonies.
I guess it just wasn't important after that, yeah.
It was to help her find where the Wayfinder is, the little Borg cube, Borg thing.
Yeah.
It looked like a Borg nodule thing that's on the Borg ship.
Why was it a dagger? I was waiting for her to have to stab Palpatine with it.
That was probably in the...
Like one of the edits, one of the
Magic
Yeah.
dagger.
Yeah, there's things like that. Like at the end when Lando, that girl sits next to him, I thought it was going to be like revealed that that's his daughter or something. I kind of feel like maybe that's something that was in
I'm
another
assuming
edit.
that's just we don't have time.
It's possible.
Why even put that in the movie then? Why have Lando meet this random character?
Why have Poe's old flame show up? Why have that random character at all? Why have the horses?
Yeah.
There's so much that should have just been cut out.
So the magical space dagger, where did that get found?
That got found on the planet with all the rave dancers.
After
right?
they got sucked down into the beads, did they
Yeah,
find it?
that whole section of the movie felt like more Indiana Jones to me than anything else. There's
her
quicksand, and then there are underground tunnels,
Yes,
and,
underground
and
tunnel. There
bones.
some archaeological stuff.
Yeah.
Even her holding the dagger up with the felt like him putting the staff of Ra in the hole.
Yeah.
And the sun shines through the thing, and
When was that dagger made?
it had Sith runes on it.
It knew to line up with the crashed remains of the Death Star. And it's got ancient Sith runes on it.
The Force, Rich.
Oh, the Force. It's not sloppy writing. It's the Force.
The little that comes out like alters its shape.
But the grooves on the dagger lined up with the wreckage on the Death Star.
In the future, it knew the future.
Yeah, the Force.
Yeah, the Force. Oh, that's so dumb.
But that dagger, C-3PO interpreted it because he wasn't programming, didn't allow him to speak Sith language.
That's why they had to go to the World War II village. They had to wipe his memory, which someone thought that was funnier than it was, them wiping his memory.
No, they wanted to give C-3PO a heroic moment. That was his sacrifice.
Yeah,
for
but
the
then
greater
after
cause.
that, then there's so many jokes about him
Yeah.
not remembering anything. And
When I was editing our last video, I was watching an interview with Anthony Daniels, and he said he constantly tried to get George Lucas to give C-3PO some kind of moment.
Oh.
And it was like, how about C-3PO does this? I tried to give him a little humanity. And George's response was always, he's always scared. And then he would come up to George Lucas again, and George, here's a moment where C-3PO could save the day. And, no, he's always scared.
That moment in this,
it's great listening to. I don't particularly like Anthony Daniels. I think he's kind of
a
full of
little
himself.
arrogant, yeah.
But that when he tells that story, George Lucas just shut him down every time. He's always scared. Shut up. And then he eventually gave up. So that was probably Anthony Daniels, his ego pushing up. I got to do something heroic in my final film as the world's greatest character ever invented, because I play him.
that moment too, and it was in the trailer where they're about to wipe his memory, and he's like, I'm looking at my friends for one last time.
Friends that hate you.
Yeah, well, that's the thing in the trailer. I was like, I'm assuming out of context in the trailer that this is they're pulling memories of him with like Luke and Leia and Han from when he was younger. Oh no, but he's talking about these new characters that he barely knows.
That hate him.
That hate him.
Yeah. But yeah, so C-3PO interprets the language on the dagger, and it says to go to Endor, the moon of Endor, right?
It's not Endor.
I guess it did, yeah. Yeah.
The moon of Endor.
Okay.
Endor is a forest moon. And I think the Endor system is a bunch of planets,
Yeah.
because they show several planets.
They're not on the Ewok planet.
No,
Yeah.
I don't think so.
No, well, we see that at the very end.
Yeah.
We get a little Wicket cameo.
Yeah, you're right. So I guess it crash landed on a different planet, even though it was in orbit of Endor.
J.J. Abrams doesn't like space. He doesn't want to understand space.
See, I just assumed, like you did, when we talked about this, when the Death Star wreckage crashed on Endor, it obliterated the forest for decades.
Yeah.
And so that's why it was all kind of like
Flat.
flat and dead grass and stuff. So I really don't know. It was on, but basically the knife, the magical Sith dagger, said to go there to find one of the little triangles.
You need a MacGuffin to find a MacGuffin.
There are several MacGuffins, and that's the Sith Wayfinder, which looks like a Borg device to me. It's glowing green, and it's like a physical device, which is so weird that the Sith would need like a...
For an ancient magical...
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're a Sith or you're in tune with the dark side of the Force, the story logic would just assume that you'd be led there.
You know what? I'm just delighted when Star Wars ever decides not to resort to space magic. So I'm fine with it.
All right. But yeah, so the Emperor had one on the Death Star in his little closet because he was a clone of an ancient being known as Palpatine.
It's an improvement, darling.
He should have changed his name when he became Chancellor and took over the galaxy. He should have called himself like Bob Smith or something.
Assuming your clone theory is what happened, we still don't know.
We're not really sure. Everything happened so fast.
I still think it might be his corpse from, well, at least his charred body from the Death Star explosion.
He landed on his fingers? Is that what you're saying?
Well, he fell fingers first. When
I broke a nail.
He was falling into the core, and then when it blew up, that pushed him like away, and that's why he survived.
Flew out of space.
He flew out into space after that.
He was shooting lightning so furiously it burned all of his fingers down to like nubs.
Yeah.
The heart of the original movies is those characters. And even though I don't love Return of the Jedi, all the stuff with Luke and the Emperor and Vader is great. It's emotional, and this is just...
This is so similar to Return of the Jedi, because Return of the Jedi, while good, has its flaws. And its flaws come in the second and third act. The opening, fine. Jabba, we got to rescue Han, a little adventure. And then after that, they had nothing to do with the characters, other than Luke.
Yeah.
Leia becomes a basic, like, ground troop person.
And Han is there also.
And their epic love romance is now just them. We got to break into this bunker. And then the idea of a second Death Star is goofy, and we have nothing for Han and Leia and C-3PO and Chewbacca and R2-D2 to do.
Yeah.
Except for do all these things on the Ewok planet. And that's essentially this movie. We have nothing for Finn, Poe, Rose, C-3PO, R2-D2, BB-8, Eeyore, or Igor.
Well, they're still, they have nothing for those characters to do, and they're still introducing new characters.
Yes.
Presumably so J.J. Abrams can pay his friends.
Yes, they add the lady who rides around on a horse, ex-stormtrooper. Her name was like, I don't know.
Zana.
Oh yeah, Zana or Lana or.
I know that because I had to buy her action figure.
Okay, Zana.
It's not Zana, is it? Then the two new characters in this are Zana and Zori?
I think so.
Really?
Someone's getting lazy.
Maybe one's Yanni.
That would be a shock if Yanni showed up in this film.
Remember I thought that they went to that Smuggler Cove planet to meet Zori Bliss, the bounty hunter, because she had components for the time travel machine.
Oh. I would have wholeheartedly welcomed time travel into this film.
Yeah.
Instead of, we got to go to the place to get the thing that will lead us to the other thing.
It would have made for a bigger mess.
Yeah, I would have welcomed a bigger mess.
Yeah. I'd say the final act of this movie is a pretty big mess, just visually, viscerally. That's when it got kind of like fun schlock to me, where it was just like nonsense, and the Emperor's hamming it up.
Yeah, Ian McDermott's performance is always.
He's always great.
Always great. It's always a joy. If he was a little more comical, I would have enjoyed it more. It wouldn't have fit the tone properly because
they definitely went for a satanic Palpatine.
Yes, they definitely.
I like the atmosphere of that whole place he was in too. How like dark and moody it was, but I guess I figured that wasn't enough. So then they turned on the strobe lights.
Yeah, but it was basically a Jedi ending. The rest of our characters are doing a thing to destroy a thing, right?
Yeah.
They got to take down the shield generator. They need the Ewoks' help, and the battle starts. And then Luke is confronting the Emperor. Rey is confronting the Emperor.
They got the technically they even have like the ground battle segment when they have to storm the top of the Star Destroyer.
Mm-hmm. With not primitives, but
they got horses.
They got horses. So there's that element, that non-technological element. They're just people that are riding around horses and living off the land because they're former stormtroopers. So so there's an Ewok-y thing going on there.
That J.J. Abrams.
Rich, you said
he knows how to remake other people's movies.
You said it a million times. Star Wars is
creatively bankrupt.
Wait a minute. Finn, early on in this movie, says, Rey, I have to tell you something, when they think they're going to die. And then he never tells her.
I don't know why they left it in the movie, but I'm assuming they were going for like a love plot. Like,
sure.
He
that's
loves
his whole
her.
thing is like, in the first two movies, he's always concerned about where's Rey, what's happening to Rey, how's Rey.
But if you're not going to have a payoff for that,
if you're not going to pay off, just cut
that out. Yes.
I mean, they ran out of time, Rich. The movie's coming out in 2 days. We got to just stop editing.
Was there so much in the movie that they just couldn't edit? They couldn't edit it properly.
That's some of the stories. They're saying that, there's just lots of different edits and re-edits of this movie, so who knows?
He's trying to tell her that he's gay. So we have our first gay Star Wars character, Jay.
We have that in this movie, though.
There is...
Two out-of-focus females in the background kiss. So progressive. Way to go, Disney.
There was that old lady.
It was that old lady, the bird lady.
Yeah, the bird lady. She I guess was a lesbian. So how progressive. Wasn't a main character. They wrote off Poe as not being gay because he did that thing where he's like, hey, Kerry Russell. He's like, huh? And then she goes,
did you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Were your eyes closed during the film? At the end,
I had to take a mental break.
She's still wearing her stupid helmet because it's not actually Kerry Russell. She's in one scene where her eyes. I think her and J.J. Abrams had a joke. They said,
"We're gonna tell people you're in the movie."
No. How little can you be in this movie, and how much money from the back end can you make? And it's like a private joke. They said
see your eyes for 5 seconds. Yeah.
And the rest of the time, it's just and she did her voiceover in like the sound booth for like an afternoon. So she was on camera, her eyes for 10 seconds, and then she was in the sound studio for half a day, right? And
now she's gonna make $10 million.
Yes, at least a couple million. And she had a body double, like in her Zori Bliss costume. She never took her helmet off.
Yeah.
But at the end, she's you don't even see her face. And Poe is like, huh? He's doing like how about you and I? Like
he started doing this, which I thought was weird for Star Wars.
It was implied that might have been a thing way back when. And then she goes, and he goes, and then he walks out of frame. That was got a case of the not gays.
Yeah, just make Poe and Finn gay. Make them super gay. Why the fuck not? That's how they come across in this movie. Just do it. There was some interview with J.J. Abrams where he was like doing that like wishy-washy. Like, I mean, maybe they could be. We're Disney. We're progressive, except not really. We just want to give the illusion. They're so phony.
Is this a new term? Passive progressive? It's like a play on passive aggressive. Because remember, what's it? Josh Gad's like minor character?
Beauty and the Beast. Yeah, he's a supporting character. He's gay. You see him dancing with a guy in one shot. Look how progressive we are.
We wouldn't do it with the main character. Can you imagine Finn and Poe like kissing? Like I mean, like I wouldn't care. A majority of people wouldn't care, but it would be a thing.
If they did that, then Star Wars fans would complain about it on the internet.
Some Star Wars fans.
And they don't complain about anything on the internet now.
No, half of them would complain, half of them would champion it.
Yeah.
Because we're in like split down the middle politics
Everything,
with Star Wars. But yeah, Finn is not in love with Rose.
Yeah.
Because remember, she's like, I want to come with you. He's like, no, stay back. And then he pats her on the shoulder. He's like, do you remember that? He's like, stay back, buddy.
She's clearly in the friend zone.
Yeah. She's been put in the friend zone even though she smooched him in The Last Jedi.
Disney's market research says they don't want you in this much of the film. You stay here.
And she basically almost killed herself to save him. Like, and then he gives her, for that, she gets a pat on the shoulder and stay back here, buddy.
Yes. Oh, you're breaking my heart.
Finn and Rey had good chemistry on screen. They shouldn't have spent the entirety of The Last Jedi apart.
I think Poe and Finn are good together too. Like the scene in The Force Awakens when they're escaping. They get in the TIE fighter or whatever, and they're trying to escape. Like, those two are good together, and then they're separate for the entire rest of that movie and all of the next movie.
They got like a little buddy cop vibe going.
Yeah.
One's a little more anal retentive, and one's a little more like loosey, hotshot kind of guy.
Regardless of whatever flaws the movies had, those characters or actors do have good chemistry together.
It makes you wish they were in a real movie.
Yeah. My personal opinion, all of Star Wars is just a fluke.
You gotta take it a little easy, Luke. You may be the hottest bush pilot this side of Mos Eisley, but those little skyhoppers are dangerous. Keep it up, one day, whammo, you're gonna end up a dark spot on the downside of a canyon wall.
It's all the Empire Strikes Back is the linchpin that is holding this house of cards together. Mm-hmm.
The first one was a disastrous film until Marcia Lucas and
editing and breakthrough special effects saved it.
Yeah. And music.
Yeah.
The John Williams score. It was like a perfect storm, and George Lucas was, he was the second luckiest man in show business after Ringo Starr. I got this space thing with there's a monster or something. Yeah, hundreds of talented people make this work.
You say the second luckiest? George Lucas sold Star Wars for $4 billion, motherfucker.
No, all right. And let's also, very briefly, to close out our review, address the comments that say, well, now do the prequels look so bad?
No, yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They're not better because these new ones aren't great. It doesn't somehow make the prequels better.
Prequels still are bad.
Like, literally none of the characters in the prequels are likable or interesting.
And the stories make no sense. And everything about those movies. And that's the thing with this, like, they look great, the effects are great, the actors are good, and it's just, it's the stories that's lacking. I will say, at least the prequels are fun to make fun of. There's so many baffling, weird things in them, and these new movies are just so bland and kind of forgettable.
A nice blend would have been having some of Lucas's ideas in this new trilogy. I know he was talking about like the wills and the Force and all this. Like
it's more George Lucas weirdness, basically.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we don't want your ideas. They're too weird. But blending that and kind of mixing that with some modern day talent and kind of figuring out a new way to go, they really need to plan this stuff out.
What do you do with Star Wars now? Where do you go?
There's a whole bunch of high-paid people asking themselves this question right now as they watch the reviews come in.
The
They sound a little more panicked than you, though.
I just think it's out of gas, you know? It's very hard to nail down exactly what to do with Star Wars. I think The Mandalorian's on the right track in terms of just scaling things back. Like that episode where they're on the space station, so simple.
It's just it's 5 characters total. It's like 5.
One hallway set.
It's fascinating.
To see the contrast between that
Yeah.
and then this movie. Fuck. I feel like I'm being smacked in the face by this movie.
Are we doing recommendations?
No.
No, we're not doing them, or no, you wouldn't recommend it?
Well, not if you're prone to seizures. There was a sign outside the theater that said that.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
Maybe wait for it to come out and like stream it, but like turn the speed of the movie down to like 1/4 speed.
Like, oh, fuck! I'm not gonna have a panic attack.
That's the new option by Netflix. To watch your movie at 25% speed.
Yeah. So you don't feel like you're having a heart attack from Star Wars?
Here's a magical space coin. This will grant you access to any Star Destroyer.
Oh, that's what that was.
I'm giving this to you, Poe, for use in scene 312.
How did this ship get aboard? Right? I heard you chuckle.
Oh yeah.
The guy comes in there and he's like, "This is this rusty spaceship that they just left on."
They just completely cut out how they got on board the Star Destroyer. Like why nobody noticed this rickety old ship landing and our characters getting off the ship.
No, Rich. Wrong. 2 stormtroopers walked up and they said, "Show us your identification," and they shot him.
Did that really happen?
Yeah.
You know what? This movie, no, seriously.
It happened so fast.
It happened so fast, I did not notice.
It was not like, do you remember Star Wars? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah,
When they landed
Star
the
Wars.
Millennium Falcon, the Millennium Falcon got tractor beamed into the Death Star, and then
They hid under the things,
and waited
and
for like 2 hours, and then they scanned the ship, and then they.
It's like a scene?
Yeah.
Like a constructed scene
Well, it
with
was
a point?
Yeah, they were infiltrating the Death Star, and they had to be very fucking careful not to get
Well, then
caught.
the guys go in with the equipment, and then you
Yes.
hear the noises.
Hey, can you give us a hand down here? The stormtroopers go up to find out what was that noise. Then they steal their costumes. Then they do this whole thing where they have Chewbacca as their prisoner.
They come down, they pretend
the
communicator's not working.
TK421, why aren't you responding? And TK421 has a problem with this Oh my God, it's Chewbacca! He's murdering me! And then they have this whole plan.
Or you just have somebody say, "How'd the ship get on here?"
That's the perfect scene comparison because it's basically the same scene.
Yeah.
Where there's 2 stormtroopers and they just come out guns blazing and murder them in this giant hangar bay where there are windows everywhere, security cameras.
The scene's 30 seconds long as opposed to 5 minutes.
Oh, it was like 8 seconds, Jay. And then they just run out.
Yeah.
And it's just storm, and they're just shooting everyone in the hallways.
Yeah, they run down the hallway and they shoot a bunch of people, and then 2 stormtroopers come up to him, and Rey just uses the Force.
Yes.
It's like, why didn't you just do that with all of them?
Are you going to recommend Rise of Skywalkers?
No, but I am going to point out that this entire trilogy has just been a waste of potential.
Yes.
Adam Driver's great. I know everyone hates Rey. I still like the main cast. I just don't think they ever did anything really interesting with them.
Yeah.
Yes, it was succinctly said. Well said. Jay?
No, I would not. I think this is the worst one. I think I like The Last Jedi more than this, and I don't really like The Last Jedi either.
No, at least The Last Jedi took its time.
Yeah.
It's nice and slow.
Yeah, this movie was just so exhausting, and not in a fun, like, ooh, it's so action-packed kind of way. I'm just like, I'm done with Star Wars.
As are a lot of people. It's.
Now, let's talk about The Mandalorian.
Can I give my recommendation, Jay?
Absolutely.
No! No, I echo the sentiments of Rich almost exactly. The cast is good. Some ideas are okay, but overall it's a clusterfuck. And I think that's what a lot of people are saying. Is it has good parts? Did it leave me in tears? No. I don't want to say if you legitimately like this film, you have a low IQ, but if you legitimately like this film, you have a low IQ. Because you are watching all the things happen so fast, and the critical part of your brain that kicks in, that's supposed to kick in.
It doesn't have time to.
Wait a minute. It keeps going by. It's like being on some kind of roller coaster ride where you can't even process. You know what I mean? It's just all the undulations and the speed, and then at the end, I think that was fun.
Yeah. I heard the John Williams score.
Yeah.
It's like you're on the little cart going through the haunted house, but none of the scares are very spooky, so they just have the car go by really fast. Well, was that a monster? Oh, was that a what?
You know what I think was the saddest part too? Forgettable. The score was for being an exclusive John Williams score was forgettable.
Yeah.
Except for the moments where you're supposed to remember things when they would bring up the old music.
Leia's theme and all that stuff.
Certain, like when she walks into the Death Star's throne room, you get that.
Dun, 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 yeah.
And so the old stings that would come in throughout the rest of.
Yeah.
Rey has a theme. I like her theme.
What is her theme?
Do 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 do. It's very whimsical. It's different than the other stuff. So. Hey, it's something from the series that I remembered.
It's news to me. It's news to me. Rey's theme. What the fuck are you talking about?
Rey's theme from Ghostbusters? Does Rey have a theme?
Ray Parker Jr.'s theme.
From Ghostbusters? Yeah, that's a great theme.
They're going to remake that song for the new movie. When there's something stranger things
They did that for
in
me.
neighborhood, who you gonna call? Finn Wolfhard. And maybe the girl who was in Godzilla. But if they were both in Ghostbusters, it'd be too obvious. What's her name?
Millie Bobby Brown?
Billy Bobby Brown.
Millie Bobby Brown.
Millie Bobby Brown.
Which is funny because Bobby Brown did a song for Ghostbusters too.
It all ties together like the Force. Remember when...
I will no longer question logical loopholes in these Star Wars films.
Do you remember? Here's another thing that'll blow your mind, Jay.
Okay.
Bobby Brown's cameo in Ghostbusters 2, he said, "Hey, can I have one of those proton packs? My kid brother wants one."
Hey, you guys got another one of those proton packs? My kid brother really wants one.
The proton pack is not a toy. I guess it's right.
Then Egon tells him, no, a proton pack is not a toy. Cut to 30 years later, and kids are firing the proton packs.
It has a gunner seat?
The proton pack is not a toy. The proton pack is not a toy. The proton pack is not a toy.
Directly against Egon's recommendation, his own fucking granddaughter.
Paul Rudd will be the kid who gets to use a real proton pack.
What?
What?
The kid brother will end up grow up to be Paul Rudd.
Bobby Brown is
Bobby
black.
Brown's a
He
black
is
man.
adopted. It's fine. He's adopted.
Ooh, swing and miss, Rich.
Thank you guys all so much. And thank you guys all for being here too. I think we're done here, right? Are we done here? Can we keep our money?
I'm sure not.
I quit. I quit Star Wars. I'm done. I'm never talking about Star Wars again. Bye.
We'll see you when we talk about The Mandalorian.
We'll see when we talk about the Picard series and Ghostbusters 2020 and everything else that's coming out that just continues to ruin our lives. We've never addressed our George Lucas bust.
Oh, is that who that is? I thought it was Bob Vila.
Goodbye, everybody.
I'm on. I can't do this anymore. There's my microphone. Hey, it's over though, you know. We don't have to talk about Star Wars movies for at least a year or two or three.
As always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on Twitter, Facebook.
So here's part of the issue. So let's say that you have a computer. Yeah, well, I have a story for this. So one time when I was in Montreal, I was using my computer. I was in my apartment and I was typing out an essay and it crashed. And so what happens when your computer crashes? Well, you know, usually you utter some sort of curse. And it's interesting that you do that because the circuit that you use to curse with is the same circuit that monkeys use to detect eagles or leopards or snakes. And so when there's a bunch of monkeys together, you know, they're not all preyed on by eagles and leopards and snakes, but you know, there's usually a predator in that category for every single monkey population. And so when the monkeys are watching, they have an emotional utterance that the most nervous monkey might utter first that basically says, you know, hide from the eagle, get out on a thin branch so the cougar can't eat you, and look the hell out for the snake. But there's a circuit that's linked to emotions that produces an instinctive utterance that represents that category. And that's the same circuit that you use when you curse. And it's not the same circuit that you use for normal language. And we know that because that circuit is activated in people who have Tourette's syndrome, because they preferentially swear. You think, well, why in the world would you have a neurological condition that makes you preferentially curse? Well, that's the reason. You don't just have one linguistic circuit. You have one for, oh my God, there's a predator. And that's the one that will get activated when something happens like your computer crashing. Because, you know, you're an evolved creature, and so those old circuits that were there, say, 30 million years ago to deal with exceptions are the same circuits you're using now to deal with your computer. Why else would you want to hit it? Right? Because that's what you want to give it a whack. It's like, it doesn't behave, whack. Aggression right away. Well, that's some clue as to the category system that you're automatically using to encapsulate the event. Okay, so fine, what do you do when your computer crashes? Well, first you curse, and then you do the stupid things that idiot primates do when they're trying to deal with something that's way too complex, and maybe you turn it on and off, right? And that doesn't work, it didn't work. And so then I thought, well, maybe the power bar went, so I checked the power bar, and I turned it on and off and nothing happened. And so I brought a light behind the computer, and the light wouldn't go on. And so I thought, aha, I must have blown a fuse. So I went to the fuse box and took a look, but the fuses were fine. And so I thought, oh, the power's gone out. So then I went outside, and the power was out. None of the street lights were working. The power was out everywhere. And it was seriously out because this was the time that almost the entire northeast power grid in Quebec collapsed. And the reason it collapsed is because there was a solar flare. That happens reasonably often, and the solar flare produced a huge electromagnetic pulse because it's basically like a million hydrogen bombs going off at the same time, 93 million miles away, produces this tremendous electromagnetic pulse, passes through the Earth's atmosphere, produces a spike in current in the main power lines and blows the whole system. And so just so you know, an event like that happens about every 150 years, and if we had one now, it would take out all of our electronics, like one of the big ones. There was a big one back in the late 1800s. Everything, satellites, computers, cars, everything, gone. And so that's a big problem, and no one knows what to do about it. One missed us by about 9 minutes, I think 2 years ago. So that's something else to worry about if you're inclined to worry about those sorts of things. Okay, so what did I conclude from that? Well, the function of my computer was dependent on the stability of the sun. It's not the first thing you check out when your computer crashes, right? You don't run out and go, hey, well, yeah, the sun's still there, no problem, I can cross that off the list. But to me, it's an extraordinarily interesting example of the invisible interdependence of things, and our tendency to fragment things. What we seem to do is to look at things at the simplest level of analysis that actually functions. So for example, when you're interacting with your computer, you're not interacting with your computer at all, really. You're interacting with the keyboard, sort of one key at a time, and you're interacting with the symbols on the screen. But as long as the computer is working, you don't care about it at all. You don't give it a second thought. And you certainly don't care about the fact that it's dependent on, well, the electrical power, for example, and the electrical power is dependent on, I don't know how many men are out there right now, or were out there last night when it was freezing rain, fixing power lines and freezing to death while they're doing it so that your stupid computer doesn't malfunction while you're watching cat videos. I mean, there's this incredibly dynamic living system that's social and economic and political that has to remain dead stable in order for us to have access to functional and like pure non-fluctuating electricity 100% of the time. Because you also don't think, well, the stability of your computer is dependent on the stability of the political system, but of course it is, because if the political system mucks up and the economic system goes, then people don't go out and work to fix things, and things are breaking all the time. That's their normal state, is broken, not working. And so, and that's all, in some sense, folded up not only inside your computer, but actually inside your conceptions of